Thank you very much, Representative Bream, the chair, and Representative Andrew Fink for inviting me. I'd also like to thank the other distinguished members of the committee. Just a little bit of my background. I'm president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. I've been chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission in Washington, and I was senior advisor for research and statistics in the Department of Justice. I've also had academic positions at Yale, Stanford, University of Chicago, and the Wharton Business School. So we all want to save lives. I fear that these laws will lead to more deaths, not fewer ones. And there's really not been much of a serious cost-benefit analysis that I've been able to see on these laws. None of these laws being proposed would have stopped the murders at Michigan State University. Just one kind of fact as a background here, people use guns defensively to stop violent crime about 5 times more frequently than guns are used in the commission of crime. And if my research convinces me of anything, it's the most vulnerable people in society who benefit the most from being able to have guns. That's two groups of people. People who are most likely victims of violent crime, which is overwhelmingly poor blacks who live in high-crime urban areas. They benefit tremendously from being able to protect themselves. And people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. I'd like to talk about the 3 main laws that we're talking about here. One is licensing. Let's say you have a woman who finds herself being threatened on a Friday evening. She can't buy or borrow a gun until Monday, and maybe in some jurisdictions until Tuesday or Wednesday in the state. Even if she's trained and knows how to use a gun and has no criminal record, if you loaned her a gun under the universal background checks that you have here, you would be committing a felony. Unlike other states that have universal background checks, there's not even an exemption in the law that's being proposed here for imminent danger. All the other states that have something like this, that if a woman is in imminent danger, you're allowed to temporarily loan her your gun. This does not even have that qualification. This would be the only state with this type of law without that exception. The way this is written, that you have to have a license to possess a gun, is going to create a huge backlog. It's because you're going to have just possess it. And what's going to happen is a lot of people who already own guns and aren't going to buy one aren't going to get a license. And the people that that's primarily going to be affecting are going to be minorities who live in urban areas who have to come across police generally, because they're not going to have a license to go and prove for a gun that they may have bought 10 or 15 years ago that they're legally likely to have it. So you're going to have a lot of minorities in urban areas who are going to find themselves criminals very quickly, because they may not realize that they have to go back and get a license for a gun that they already have. You know, you look at Michigan, only 2.9% of murders in the last 10 years in Michigan involved any type of rifle. That's very similar to the national average. Licensing and registration is not going to solve crime. You know, in theory, if a gun is used in a crime and it's licensed and registered to the person who committed the crime, you can go and trace it back if it's left at the crime scene there. The problem is that virtually never happens. Crime guns are virtually never left at the crime scene, and the few times that they are left at the crime scene, it's because the criminal's been either killed or seriously wounded, so you've already solved it. In the few times that they are there, they're not registered. And the once or twice that they are registered there, they're not registered to the person who committed the crime. I could go through examples from Hawaii and Pennsylvania and D.C. and New York and Maryland, states that have spent tens of millions of dollars on licensing and registration. They cannot point to one single crime that they've been able to solve as a result of that process. In Hawaii, Honolulu alone, in the registration licensing program that they have, estimated that it took 50,000 hours worth of police time each year just in Honolulu to go and handle the registration and licensing. If you could point to 1,000 crimes that you've solved, there'd be some trade-off, because we know 50,000 hours worth of police time could solve a lot of crimes. But they can't point to 1,000. They can't point to 100 since 1960. They can't point to 12. They can't point to 3 crimes that they've been able to solve as a result of that. So you're giving up 50,000 hours worth of police time each year for no benefit. I bet you the state police are going to come asking for more money if you go and pass this in order to do that. That's money that could have been spent on anything from education to other types of policing that would be able to work. And I could go through if there are questions in other places. With regard to the safe storage law, the notion that it could save 20 lives in a few month period of time, it was just mentioned, seems impossible to me. If you look at the CDC for Michigan, for the last 5 years that they have data from 2016 to 2020, there was a total of 8 accidental gun deaths in the state, an average of 1.6 per year for anybody under age 18. By contrast, if you look at accidental motor vehicle deaths, there was 135, drowning deaths 108, pedestrian deaths 70, 60 deaths from poisoning, and more than twice the rate of accidental deaths involving bicycles than guns in Michigan. I talk about suicides, but over 70% of suicides involving those under 18 don't involve guns. And there's a lot of academic evidence that indicates that when you pass safe storage laws, there's no change in accidental gun deaths and there's no change in suicides. What happens is you see an increase in crime. When you make it so that people have to lock up their guns and not easily accessible, what you find is that criminals become emboldened to attack people in their home and people are less able to go and defend themselves. And that there's a total increase in deaths that occur. And it's particularly in urban areas where you see those increased deaths that are going to be occurring. I give you one simple example. We have data for all sorts of countries, but compare the UK with the United States. The UK has about twice the burglary rate that the United States has, and 60% of the burglaries in the UK occur while the residents are in the dwelling, compared to just 13% in the United States. Why is it so high? In the United States, burglars spend twice as long casing a home before they break in. The reason why they do that is they're worried about getting shot. They're not worried about that in the UK. One way to protect yourself if you're a burglar is to make sure nobody's home, because then you don't have to worry about the possibility of getting shot. Burglars in the UK, not only more likely to break in, but they're more successful in harming the people in the home than their American burglar counterparts are. And I'll just quickly talk about red flag laws. Look, the notion that you can just take away a person's guns is going to solve concerns about suicide or other dangers simply isn't serious. There's so many different ways for people to go and harm themselves. You already have a much better law on the books there in terms of involuntary commitment. It gives judges a huge range of options that they have. They can have the person voluntarily seek outpatient mental health care. They can take away a person's guns. They can take away their driver's license if they think they might run them over with a car. Or, in the most extreme cases, they can do involuntary commitment. But if you're really concerned about somebody committing suicide, simply taking away their guns is not a serious thing. What you find is that people simply transition to other ways of suicide. We heard a minute ago about the drop in suicides in Connecticut. What's not mentioned is that all the neighboring states had bigger drops in suicide over the same period of time, and none of those had red flag laws. Any serious study isn't just going to look at the before and after average, because there's all sorts of other things that are going to change. What you're going to look at is to see how the suicide rates change in the state that's adopting these laws relative to the other states that aren't. And when you do that, you in fact find that there's an increase in suicide in those states that pass these red flag laws. And there's a simple reason for that. And that is people can become afraid to go and talk to other people about being depressed. If you're a police officers are depressed at relatively high rates. They commit suicide at relatively high rates. If you're a police officer and you lose your gun, though, you lose your job. You're out of a job at that point. What do you think happens to a police officer's willingness to go and talk to friends or relatives about possibly being depressed if he's worried about talking to them? And even a well-meaning friend, they say that person's depressed. I know he has a gun. I'm going to go and make a complaint that's there. Under red flag laws, the only thing that the judge sees is the complaint. The judge doesn't talk to the person who made the complaint. He doesn't get to talk to the officer himself to find out what the conditions are there. You have all sorts of problems that can arise. And if simply being able to go and talk to other people about being depressed can be extremely important in getting over the depression that you have. And you're going to create, and that's the reason why I think the academic evidence shows that anything that's done seriously rather than just kind of simple before and after comparisons that are there, shows that these laws actually have a pernicious effect on it. I'll mention one last thing, and that is, you look at surveys that go and show support for red flag laws. What's the question that's always asked in these surveys? They say, do you support a judge being able to temporarily take away a person's guns if the person is a danger to themselves and others? And you find 2 or 3 to 1 support for it. The problem is that's already the law in Michigan. That's already the law in all 50 states. It's called involuntary commitment. What happens with the red flag laws is that they make several big changes, but 2 of them is you no longer have a hearing before the judge taking the guns taken away, and you have no mental health care professionals involved. If you rerun the survey question and simply ask, how does your opinion of this change if you're told that there's no hearing before the gun's taken away and there are no mental health care professionals involved, it goes from 2 to 1 support to almost 2 to 1 opposition. And the biggest swings in views are among Democrats and liberals, who are most concerned when you go and tell them that there are no mental health care professionals involved in the process and no hearing. And finally, given that so much of the discussion here in Michigan, a lot of the bills that have been coming up are with regard to gun-free zones, I'll just mention the problem that you have with gun-free zones is that it's the most law-abiding, good citizens who obey them relative to criminals. If you want to go and stop a mass public shooting, all right, and you have a 3-year or 5-year penalty on that, if you or I were to violate the law, that would completely change our lives. But if you're somebody who's going to go and do a mass public shooting and going to go and kill 7 or 8 or 9 different people and already going to be facing 7 life sentences or so, is the notion that a 3-year penalty is going to say, well, I can live with the 7 life sentences, but if you're going to impose an additional 3 years, that's too much. I'm not going to go and do it now. It's simply not credible. The whole notion of marginal deterrence that you have there is that you're going to be making it so that the only people who are going to obey the law are going to be the law-abiding citizens, not the person who's engaging in the attack there. And what you've done is, rather than make the place safe, you've created a magnet because they know they'll be the only person around there with the gun. It makes it more attractive for these criminals to go into places where guns are banned. Their goal is to kill people. They know they get more media attention. And so time after time, when you read, when you read the diaries or manifestos from these killers, they explicitly talk about why they picked the target that they did. I'll give you one quote. I can give you 50 of these. But take the Buffalo mass murder from last year at the grocery store. In his manifesto, he writes, quote, attacking in a weapons-restricted area may decrease the chance of a civilian backlash. Schools, courts, or areas where CCWs, concealed handgun permits, are outlawed or prohibited will be good areas of attack. Areas with strict gun laws are also great places of attack. He's not the only one who says that. These guys may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid. They plan these attacks long in advance, and they take advantage of the fact that other people, the law-abiding citizens, will be disarmed in those places. Greatly appreciate your time, and thank you.
Thank you for that very informative discussion. I have a few questions. I'm going to try to keep them brief so that they can just a yes or a no if you can.
Sure.
Of a study of about 156 mass shootings between 2009 to 2016, about 10% of those occurred in gun-free zones. Most of those occurred, about 63% of these occurred in private homes. So, and other information that we have from studies show that there's very little relation between the location of a mass shooting and the shooter attempting to seek only a gun-free zone. There is a personal connection. Are you aware of those studies?
I am, but I think it's like every town or whatever that you're pointing to. And I need a little bit more than that. Look, there's a reason why the FBI defines mass public shootings and active shootings the way they do, okay? They talk about public places, okay? And they also talk about attacks that don't involve some other type of crime, like a robbery or a gang fight over drug turf. About 87% of the ones in the cases that you're talking about are actually gang fights that are occurring. Now, are gang fights over drug turf important? Yeah, they are.
But do those occur because they're a gun-free zone?
No, but the point is you have completely different motives and causes and solutions for stopping a gang fight over drug turf. Gang fights know that both sides are likely armed. They're going, and the reason why they're fighting against each other is because they're fighting over the profits that are there.
But not because it's a gun-free zone.
No, not because of the gun-free zone. And that's one reason why the FBI, this isn't my definition, this is the FBI's definition. The reason why when we hear these mass public shootings, usually what people are talking about is somebody going into a mall or a movie theater or a school or something where the whole point of the attack is simply to go and kill people. Okay, these guys want to commit suicide, but they want to get media attention, and they know the more people they kill, the more media attention they're going to get. And so the question is, how, rather than getting rid of the First Amendment, how do you take away their goal? And the way you take away their goal is by limiting the number of people that they can go and harm. And the way you do that is making sure somebody's there quickly, just like the statement from the Buffalo mass murder. If you look at the case...
Wouldn't they also be able to limit the number of people harmed if, say, by chance, the number of bullets fired is also limited if you didn't have as many bullets in a clip?
Look, about 85% of the guns in the United States are semi-automatic guns, okay? And there's good benefits for civilians having semi-automatic guns in terms of self-defense. If I were to have a manually loaded gun, like a rifle, where I have to physically put another bullet in the chamber, that takes time to be able to go and do that. If I'm a civilian and I face multiple criminals, or I fire and miss, or I fire and wound but don't incapacitate the attacker, I may not have the luxury of time to manually reload the gun that's there. And, I don't know if you know this, but a magazine is like the simplest part of the gun. I've seen people put magazines together literally with just a simple stamping press in 2 minutes. If you go and ban magazines of different sizes, the only people that you're going to stop from having the magazines are going to be law-abiding citizens. These are boxes with a spring in it. It's incredibly simple technology to be able to go and stamp out magazines of whatever size you want to have. And the problem you have to be careful of is that when you go and pass these laws, that they're not primarily just going to be obeyed by law-abiding citizens,
sure,
and not the criminals.
Now, you mentioned also that basically what you're boiling down to is the good guy with the gun.
Okay.
Okay. So you mentioned several studies. The FBI did a study of about 160 active shooting incidents between 2000 to 2013. Only one that the FBI found was stopped by an individual with a valid firearms permit. About 21 of those were stopped by an unarmed citizen. That seems to contrast with the data that you gave before.
Okay. Actually, when I was in the Department of Justice, I was asked to go and evaluate the FBI active shooting reports. If you look at the period of time, and this was my job to go and do that, if you look at the active shooting reports from the FBI, from 2014 through 2021, they have 252 active shooting cases. They claim that there was only 11 of those that involved citizens with permanently concealed handguns. There are two types of errors that they have there. One is they misclassify 5 of the cases. You had things like the church shooting in December 2019 outside of Fort Worth, which they classified, and some others as security guards when they were really just regular parishioners that were there at the church. The second thing is they missed 124 other cases involving active shootings. And all those ones that they missed were ones involving concealed carry permits there. Now, so rather than 4%, it was actually 34%. And they made another issue, and I argued with them when I was there, and that is you have to separate out places where people are allowed to carry versus ones they weren't. You're talking about law-abiding citizens stopping an attack. If you have a gun-free zone and it's illegal for a civilian to have a gun in those areas, you can't expect them to go and stop attacks in areas where it's illegal for them to have it. And if you exclude the places where it was illegal for them to carry it from their data, it was over 50% of the active shooting cases were stopped by law-abiding citizens.
So, sir, I'm going to stop you there because I just want to make two quick points. And Representative Fink has a question. You noted the number of robberies that were happening in the UK, but I also want to make sure
Burglaries.
Burglaries. In the United States, for every 100,000 citizens, there's about 4.116 firearm deaths. In the UK, it is 0.039. They have an insanely low number of firearm-related deaths. And then you've also stated that the Michigan State incident could have been stopped with an IRPA law, which I'm going to respectfully disagree with, because this is a situation where the father, a family member, somebody who knew this gentleman, could have gone to law enforcement and said this person is a threat to themselves or others and temporarily asked to have those removed. And you further said that there's essentially nothing given by a possible defendant that would allow them to defend themselves in a court of law. And also, these IRPA laws, they absolutely afford that process.
After the gun's taken away.
A temporarily confiscation. Within 14 days, they have the opportunity to earn that firearm back if they can show that they are not a threat to themselves or others.
Okay.
So
I'm happy to deal with each of the points that you bring up.
Well,
First of all,
I would like you to, but
quickly.
we do not have enough time. I just needed to get that across because I respectfully disagree with that assertion. Representative Fink?
My question would be whether you have any reaction to the points that Chair Breen just made.
Yeah, sure. Well, you take the
Well
UK
played.
example that's there. The UK has fewer murders than the United States does, but they had even fewer murders per capita before they passed the laws. When you look at they've had three major gun control laws in the UK: 1920, 1956, and 1997. 97 when they banned handguns. The original licensing rules went into effect in 1920. After each of those laws, the murder rate in the UK went up. Okay, it was primarily law-abiding citizens that you were disarming relative to the others. With regard to so it's lower now, but it's the gap between the United States and the UK actually got smaller after they passed the laws that were there. With regard to the red flag laws and stopping Michigan State University shooting, the father could have gone and done involuntary commitment. The initial standards for triggering involuntary commitment is exactly the same as it is for the red flag laws. If he couldn't do it and didn't do it with involuntary commitment, the question is, why would he have done it with the red flag laws? My concern is that everybody just talking about red flag laws makes it so people don't think as much as they should about involuntary commitment. Involuntary commitment, if the person has mental health problems, he gets treatment. There's no treatment under these red flag laws that are there.
Thank you, sir. And
One other point, but
we have to move on, sir. Just as a final point, this isn't a one thing or the other. This is a yes and situation. We do need better mental health care in this country, but we also simply do not have the resources to involuntarily commit everybody who is an
that's
imminent
usually
threat.
not the case with these
And I'm going to
rules.
have to respectfully disagree, sir.
No, but involuntary commitment gives the judge
I would
a
invite you
range.
back to a later time. We have to move on.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
I don't know, did anybody else have
Committee,
questions?
please. So I appreciate the facts. You have given me a lot to think about. You've given this committee a lot to think about, but we have to move on to hear from Dr. Tim Carey, who is over Zoom. Thank
All
you,
right,
sir.
Thank you very much.